Hi, I'm actually calling this post Forget Your Trauma. And I call it that mostly because people will probably react to it and talk about what's that idiot saying. Anyway, I actually do have some serious things to say about trauma, but just let me put that in context. In August, I led a vision quest out in New Mexico, and it was a wonderful event with some great people. And one of the people there, a woman, um, was apprenticing, and she had been apprenticing and had led different programs for a while. And she just said that some of her friends in California wanted her to step up and commit to guide Vision Quest. And but another thing she said was that all in California, her friends and a lot of the people there who were guiding quests had the point of view that you had to, in some way, be trained as a trauma-informed therapist in order to be a Vision Quest guide. And I want to say, I think that's one of the most foolish positions you could possibly take. Um, First of all, I'll just say in a certain grand scheme of things, uh, someone who's a trauma-informed therapist. So here are people in California, modern people. A trauma-informed therapist is someone who's been to college, got an advanced degree, and probably is making oodles of money per hour. So I want to say first, just on the surface of it, I find it a little crazy that people who are probably among the most privileged, free, and wealthy people in the history of the planet are all talking about their trauma. This just on the basics surface of it, it seems absurd to me that people that privileged, that free, and that who've probably grown up with fewer challenges than anybody in the history of the world are all focusing on their trauma. Um, Going from there, I just want to share a little bit of how some of this lands with me. Um, I think it was way back when in the early days of my spiritual journey, I think it was in the 1980s, a fairly well-known and respected teacher named Carolyn Mace uh, started talking about what she called woundology. And what she was talking about was that people were using the wounds of their life as a way of connecting with people. And so often, an example of that would be on meeting someone, a lot of people connect by complaining about their lives. In some sense, complaining and forming bonds around it. On the one hand, it's like, uh, finding a common enemy and getting some mutual sympathy. And it's also another way of just connecting on the basis of just how hard something is. And so I have nothing against speaking about how hard things are. But if that becomes a mode of, it's like the default mode of the way human connect, there's something deeply wrong with it. I do remember way back when, in some of the workshops I've led over the years, I've challenged people to um, introduce themselves, or I have people milling in a room and joining up in pairs and saying each person has to try to connect by sharing all the things they're most proud of. So I just want you to imagine that. Suppose your mode of connecting with someone was not by this kind of mutual support of poor me, but to try and connect on the basis of your power, your energy, the things you've done to overcome challenges, to instead of again creating sympathy by how tough things are, creating sympathy by the complaint, to try and create a bond by talking about uh, by something empowering, what you're proud of. I think when most people are challenged to do that, they find it fairly difficult. And the fact that people find it difficult is, in some sense, maybe it's part of old stuff saying, oh, pride becomes pride comes before a fall, or you're not supposed to brag. But I think it also comes from it is so contrary to where the culture is at the moment. The culture is so focused on trauma and difficulty and the complaint. There's another thing I want to say in regards to the statement, forget your trauma, is um, there's a saying I've used for a long time: energy flows where attention goes. Yeah, attention is a form of energy. Where I put my attention is where the energy goes. But suppose my attention is always going to my victimhood, then I'm giving energy to my victimhood. It makes it more likely I will feel and act and engage with the world as a victim. A third, or maybe a fourth thing I want to say is in terms of my history with with the subject of trauma. Way back in the 60s, there was a famous teacher named Marshall McLuhan who spoke about the medium is the message. And he was talking about the effect of TV, saying that the effect of connecting through that medium was way greater than the actual content that was being spoken or filmed on that medium. And he had a fairly famous colleague called Edmund Carpenter, and he wrote a book, You Become What You Behold. What you gaze at or what you see is what you become. And so people are quite aware of that. There's in terms of skiing, it's fairly known that your skiing path will follow where your eyes go. And or it's really well known that if you're throwing a baseball, the ball will follow where your eyes are going. And we also know that in terms of driving. You know, if you want to drive and stay on the road and stay in the lane, then your eyes have to be in the lane. Hence, that's the reason why there are so many laws against texting. Because if your eyes aren't in the lane, it's pretty likely that you won't stay in the lane. And so, and I'll just say, I once gave an example of it like this. As a kid, I used to walk on railroad tracks. I would cut through the woods, and then there would be some railroad tracks, and there was about a mile-long walk along those tracks until I came to a pond that was called Stump Pond. That was way out in the woods, and then I'd go down the steep bank from the railroad tracks to the pond to fish. So while I was walking along the tracks, I would often, as many kids do, get on the tracks itself and see how far I could walk on those railroad tracks. And they're about, that far apart, I would guess 2.5, 3 inches. And, sometimes it would go well, sometimes it would go worse. But often sometimes I could get on, I could really get in my groove, and I might be able to go, I don't know, 100 feet or more on that 2.5 inch or 3 inch track. So the fact that I could go 100 feet on that 2.5 or 3 inch track means that if that track was, say, 8 inches wide, I could easily walk it and virtually never fall off. So here's the example I come up with. So imagine if I laid a 2x8, a plank about this wide, down on the ground, and it was, and you know, and this was a 2x8 that was 100 yards long, and I put a $500 bill at the end of that track, and I said, if you can walk along this 2x8 for all of these 100 yards, you get the $500. Anybody would jump at that. Anyone could do it. It's easy. But now imagine all of a sudden I take that same 2x8 that's 100 yards long and I raise it 500 feet in the air. And I say, and I put the $100 bill on the other end and say, if you can walk that 100 yards on this 2x8, you get the $500 bill. And it would be difficult. Because I've seen that happen in wilderness so many times. So when all of a sudden there's steep cliffs around you, all of a sudden walking that 2x8, trying to get 100 yards down the path, all of a sudden we're just tipping and frightening, and we almost get frozen with fear. And I ask, why is that? It's so easy to walk that 2x8 when it's on the ground, but all of a sudden it's 500 feet. The reason is because we're focusing on the fall. When it's on the ground, there's no reason to even think of the fall. It's not a problem. But 500 feet in the air, it's like, ooh, it's scary. And so our focus, our attention may be on, quote, not falling, but our attention is still on the fall. And as soon as our attention is on the fall, we are drawn to falling. So just for the sake of, I am going to, I'll probably do a second post on this, but for the moment I want to quickly say two things. Again, about the focus on trauma. I would say one of the main reasons to forget your trauma is because the act of focusing on it makes it worse. You know, all of this stuff of training ourselves to recognize trauma or feeling that you should be trauma informed, the process of focusing on that doesn't help. In fact, I mean, the studies that have shown again and again and again that a trauma-informed public or a mental health awareness actually just makes the problem worse. And I'm going to come back to that a lot in the next post. But for right now, I want to finish off with my main point, is that vision quests and rites of passage were never about healing trauma. Vision quests and rites of passage are about empowerment. They're about empowering us to live, to find the tools, to find the ways, the attitudes, and the stories to live a passionate life and a meaningful life in a world that is and always has been filled with challenges and dangers. So vision quests are about empowerment. They're about finding the tools and the stories to live in a dangerous world with passion and with joy and with excitement And that's what a vision quest is about. It is not about healing trauma. It's about finding ways where we can live in a dangerous world, because the world has been and always will be dangerous. Vision quests are about living in that world. And with that, I'll leave you today. Enjoy and live passionately in this beautiful and stunning and dangerous world. Oh.